Alright, my slideshow is on early King of the Hill. Also Mike Judge and his work in general. I put early because I know King of the Hill ran well into the 2000s and then was rebooted recently. So I'm mainly focusing on early King of the Hill here because it was created in 97, I believe, and ran for 3 years in the 90s. But that's also why I included Mike Judge and his works. I want to generalization. Just kind of focusing on Mike Judge, his animation style, and some of his early works. The early history from Mike Judge, he was born in 1962. He actually graduated from college with a Bachelor of Science in Physics, but I found that he quickly got bored when he started working, and he discovered animation. Yeah, he created his first animated short titled Office Space in 1991, which would very soon lead to Beavis and Butthead. But this is what do you call it, a frame from Office Space, actually. You can tell how rough it is, how hand-drawn and authentic it looks. I mean, like, the desk looks like it was colored with crayon almost. You can just look at it and you can see how authentic it looks. Beginning with his actual shows, we have Beavis and Butthead. Beavis and Butthead was very clearly hand-drawn. Traditional cell style animation. So each frame put on a cell, and the cells would cycle through the camera. You would get about 12 to 24 frames a second. You would want at least 12 to 24 typically, even in the 90s, just to make sure that the flow of animation, what I guess existed, because anything less than 12 to 24, it would look really choppy, and it just would not be ideal. Beavis and Butthead actually began with a animated short called Frog Baseball. Frog Baseball was a very unique short. It was Beavis and Butthead basically playing baseball with a frog, but the animation style was so rough that they almost looked uncanny. It was definitely something very unique at the time. It was not a traditional cartoon. It wasn't your everyday Cartoon Network cartoon, or it was its own thing. Very, very crude look, but also allowed for a lot of uniqueness and flexibility in expression. Mike Judge, he actually used clear acetate sheets, which separated the characters from the background. This was huge for the 90s because the character and the background were typically kind of fused, I guess, and the character would be drawn over and over and over. But separating the characters from the background actually allowed the characters to kind of express themselves more and move freely more, and it overall just kind of, it wasn't obviously a 2D animation, but it kind of felt like a little 3D was starting to happen just because the characters were kind of popping from the background a little bit. They felt like they were separate and not glued to the background. Uh, oh, I forgot to mention the facial expressions, but because of this crude look, Mike Judge actually did very, very good facial expressions. This very rough, hand-drawn look, it allowed for almost uncanny facial expressions that no other cartoon offered. It was very unique, and it was a selling point for many of his shows, including Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill. King of the Hill was actually one of the first animated series to take place in reality, the American South. By this, I mean that most cartoons usually focus on fiction, superheroes and whatnot. King of the Hill was based on a family in southern Texas. Like, they didn't have much to go off of here in terms of setting, but they took the setting and they combined it with the uniqueness of Mike Judge's art and style. It became something that no other cartoon had became before. It was a traditional cartoon that focused on an everyday reality that many people are familiar with. Basic family values, just basic day-to-day tasks that somehow ended comedically for these King and Hill characters. He actually did base Arlen, Texas off of his home in Garland, Texas, his prior home. But yeah, King of the Hill kind of blew up because it found comedy in very mundane aspects of everyday life. It was huge for its time because it was one of very few cartoons to do this. Quickly gained traction after releasing, and it actually did outperform The Simpsons briefly in 97, 98. This is kind of ironic because one of the co-founders of King of the Hill is actually one of the creators of The Simpsons. So kind of ironic that his show outperformed his other show. Style and innovations. King of the Hill and Beavis and Butthead, just kind of Mike Judge's early work in general, it all had a very rough style. You could tell that it was pre-digital era. It was all very noticeably hand-drawn. The characters, as you can tell here, we have Hank Hill and then Hank Hill. They do not look like the same Hank Hill. That was the beauty of hand-drawn. You could make wild, uncanny facial expressions, and you could make certain frames just look completely different. You know that's Hank Hill. It's just very rough, very hand-drawn, and honestly unsettling because these don't look like the same person. But that was the uniqueness of the show and what it brought to the table. I put Bobby Hill in parentheses here. I forgot to include a picture, but I wanted to use him as an example because if you watch early seasons of King of the Hill, you will realize that Bobby Hill is by no means perfect. His head has dents in it in some episodes. His facial expressions look like they're non-human in some episodes, and he overall just is very uncanny looking in the earlier seasons. It was very unique. Not a lot of other cartoon characters had done this before. Um, yeah, but taking this and translating it to today, it proved to me that making everything realistic or up to current standard, it's not always the best choice. King of the Hill and Beavis and Butthead gained widespread popularity because of their unconventional, hand-drawn, and at times, comedically relieving art styles. Inspiration for me from Mike Judge, I would say that my work can be influenced by him in many ways. I would begin with the understanding that uniqueness is what draws crowds and not realism or perfectionism, because Mike Judge's work was by no means perfect, and by all means it was probably a lot rougher than many cartoons out at the time. But because of this, he kind of found his own audience, his Adult Swim audiences. He found his people, and it was because of his uniqueness that he found his people. Entertainment can be found in the most unexpected places. Mike Judge kind of shows me to not be afraid to do what others haven't done, because he took Beavis and Butthead and he made a cartoon about two obnoxious teenagers that, I mean, typically you wouldn't really want to watch a show about, honestly. But then he added his uncanniness and his rough style and his comedic timing, and it became its own thing, and it blew up. Do not be afraid to do what others have not. And then lastly, Mike Judge has taught me that there is an audience for everything. You just need to find your people. You would not have believed me if I went back 30 years and told you that a cartoon about a family in Texas dealing with everyday problems blew up. You wouldn't believe me because that just seems like such a simple concept, and it doesn't seem like something that would gain popularity or traction all that much because there's no selling point. But the selling point is Mike Judge himself. It's his art style, it's his unique roughness, his uncanniness of the facial expressions, and his ability to find comedy in everyday tasks. It's just, you need to find your people, really. You find your audience, you find your people, and you can get something started. Can you can start a cartoon based off of nothing, basically. Like, you just have to find your people. And that is all I have.